Welcome to Dive Deep. I'm your host, Caleb Swartz. Our goal here at Dive Deep is transformation. As our minds are renewed by the Word of God, we aim to provide spiritually motivating and challenging conversations so that we may be not only hearers, but doers of the Word. Greetings to our regular listeners, and if you're new here, we welcome you into the conversation. Pastor Arlie, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
We continue our conversation on price and providence.
Yes.
And a lot of fun this week looking at Boaz's past. I was really struck by the connection of Rahab and Ruth, both being foreigners, but just how the story played out around that theme. You know, we see Boaz rise to prominence. And we probably don't think much about it, but you brought that to our attention. Like here, even through what would have been the famine, he rises to prominence. So God must have blessed Rahab, Solomon, and Boaz. Did I say that right?
You said it
Solomon.
right.
Got
Solomon.
it. There we go. What does this tell us about just God, about Israel, about the Old Testament? The fact that we see the introduction of what would have been considered foreigners.
Yes.
Yet very prominent individuals in the story, God's story through history, and he blessed them richly. I mean, I think often we hear about the Jewish people being the chosen people, and it can leave us wondering if, well, I'm not Jewish, I'm not the chosen. Am I somehow a second rate because of that? Yet here we see foreigners involved. Talk about it.
No, and Rahab being the first Gentile convert,
right?
Which is really cool.
Yeah.
When we think about it, and really, you kind of wonder, like Boaz, if you don't put it in context, he just comes out of nowhere.
Right, which is always, I think, I won't say always. It's how a lot of people approach the book of Ruth.
Sure.
Yeah.
Like just these two characters that they suddenly become aware of. But then I really felt like to really talk about Boaz, I needed to give background to him and really dig into it. So as I was digging into it and coming across, obviously, Rahab, and then her story, and then reading that, and then kind of doing more research and understanding, and then it was like, yeah, like Rahab and Ruth, both foreigners. Of course, Boaz is going to treat Ruth with the dignity, the respect, the compassion, the care that he would want people to treat his mother.
Yeah.
And can you imagine the stories growing up for Boaz?
Right.
Like here she is, recognized for her past, and somehow that title still goes with her into the New Testament. Rahab the prostitute, or Rahab the harlot.
Was not known as Rahab the godly woman after, you know.
The courageous woman.
No.
And yet Boaz is a godly man, and he follows all the boundaries. And you would think evidently his father and their family was a leading, prominent family. And then somehow Rahab gets into this, whether or not.
Sure, the conjecture, if it was one of the spots, which is fun to think about.
Isn't it? It is. Yeah. It is. And if that were the case, then we see this playing into the picture of what an incredible woman that she was. But all of those things would have been taught to Boaz from little growing up.
It makes you think about today. Who do we treat and why do we treat them that way? Well, most often I think because we were taught that, but talk about that a little bit.
Well, Scripture is filled with the importance of how we treat foreigners. It's over and over, like Old Testament, particularly talks about our compassion, our love, our care. And I think that if we're not careful, even in our culture and in our central PA culture, we're not as inviting, warm, accepting, encouraging to those of foreign descent as we should be.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think there's a an importance Yes, I stand for the importance of legal immigration. But if someone's here illegally, I'm going to treat them with kindness, respect, appreciation, love, and I'm going to reach out to them and do the best I can.
And I think that's it. There's a very big difference between political stances and really supporting that and pushing for that on a national scale. But then when they're in front of you, when they're a person in front of you, that needs to, you still treat them as a human being and as an equal.
Absolutely.
And I think not only does it get projected onto those that might be here illegally, but it also gets projected onto those from nationalities that we're very unfamiliar or uncomfortable with. I think of a lot of Middle Eastern people. If they come to central Pennsylvania, there's a lot of people that are going to treat them poorly, and we are not to do that.
Nope, absolutely. Doesn't matter what the background is, I get it. I think there's a lot of feelings and whatever, but we can't act on our feelings. We have to act on what is right in our will to do the right thing. So I think there's a great importance of making sure we're cautious on how we do. People would say, yeah, this is America, speak English. And I think, okay, I get that. I get that it's important to learn English. I don't have a problem with that. However, I've been going to Guatemala for over 15 years. I took 2 years of Spanish. I can understand quite a bit. My expressive is so poor, significantly lower. I can survive. But when I'm there in Guatemala, they don't care if I can speak clear Spanish or not.
Right.
They love that I try. And they're very accepting. Right. And, and I think, well, that's who we should be. So people that are here that are trying to learn English, they are inhibited because their English is not real great. But we need to make sure we're embracing, accepting, loving, and understanding that it's a journey for everyone.
That's exactly right. And I think that takes us back to understanding Rahab. I mean, clearly she would have been an individual that would have been socially unacceptable within Jewish culture. She started out as a prostitute. And we talk about kind of some of the dynamics. And you made the comment yesterday about her lying, but being a prostitute. And I wanted to give you a platform to talk a little bit more about that because I heard that and I just had to smile. And so someone could raise the question, well,
is it okay for prostitutes to lie?
I guess so. I don't know. But talk about why it was different for her. I mean, what did she see coming? Who was she in that moment? And why did that change things?
Well, I think what God is rewarding is that her courage and her faith in coming to God. Like, she had no way of becoming a God follower, large G, because she was in a total small g culture and had no knowledge or anything other than the stories. And she was aware of those stories of the, big G God, of what he had done and all the things that were talked about. So there was an element of fear that was among her people that like, whoa, if they come against us and the big G God is going to, come against us, then we're in trouble. So, I mean, I think that she kind of was that kind of faith already. And obviously, as in her circumstances, she was showing great courage, not exactly knowing all the commandments that had not been given to her.
I think that's a big part of it. She was just being introduced to God.
Absolutely.
It was all brand new for her.
But from that point on, she must have followed all of those because look at Boaz.
Right.
The fact that he was a God follower.
Yeah.
And had been influenced by all that.
So it's kind of cool. I mean, obviously we don't know for certain, but you can almost trace her development as a follower of God from the moment the spies entered her home until we get to Boaz. There was a progression between there for that to be the outcome, we would say.
And she came back, her whole family came to the, culture of the big G God. And now we're going to be aware of the commandments and aware of that we live differently than what we did before. So there's a whole lot of things that happened in that process that brought her to that point.
And I think it's interesting because people oftentimes will get this perception that the Jewish culture at this time, as Joshua was leading through conquering, the promised land, was one that was unaccepting to foreigners. But that wasn't necessarily the case. It's so interesting because as I was doing a little research, Jericho was destroyed and annihilated because it was a military center and a very wicked center for worship.
Yeah.
It was the start of God demonstrating himself to the inhabitants, and then they moved pretty slowly through the promised land. And I've heard that was intentional to give time for those that inhabited that area to vacate it, to leave, so they could leave without being destroyed. And then as people would turn to them, they were called to accept them. I mean, it talks about that in Jewish law. They're supposed to treat foreigners well. And so there's this perception that it was all about destroying anyone that was there. Well, no, not necessarily. It was, and with Rahab, she was accepted into that people group, into the Jewish group. And I just find that interesting.
And I guess what I would say is, aren't you glad that God doesn't hold us for what we don't understand?
Yeah.
But he holds us for what we do understand.
Right.
And so Rahab didn't know the commands, didn't understand those. She wasn't held for those.
Yeah.
But later on, yes, because she was aware. True for all of us. We become more and more aware of what God is calling us to and how he's, directing us and how we need to respond to it as time goes on.
And I think that's it. The more God reveals himself to you, you're responsible then to act on that and follow him where he's going.
Absolutely.
And that can be really challenging. I don't think that ever gets easier. You could tell me. I mean, as a mature Christian, it's not.
It keeps growing.
Yeah.
We're always in a growth pattern.
Yeah. I'd also like to ask a little bit just about Ruth finding herself being really on the receiving end of God providing for her in miraculous ways, incredible ways. We could say being blessed, but I like the definition of a blessing being something that draws you closer than God, to God, versus something materialistic. But we see that, she is so well taken care of. And as you read the Proverbs, I mean, there's all kinds of language in there about the righteous will be taken care of. They'll find their escape. God will save them. God will provide for them. God will lavish on them. Do you think there's a tendency for Christians to believe that they don't deserve to receive in this lifetime, as if almost, I don't want to say a false humility, but they feel unworthy of God lavishing anything on them?
I think, we talk a little bit about that in the Blessed Life, and I think it's a biblical framework. I think we have to be careful not to really directly tie everything to physical blessings.
Right.
But I do think there's a reward for, our righteous living that God brings. There's a kind of a cause and effect that happens. And I think as we are obedient, we can know more and more of the will of God. And I think he can be able to trust us with more. Because when he can trust us with little things, then he can trust us with more things. And, I think that's, both spiritual and physical. And, we can't always judge on the outside. I don't think it's our right or our part to even consider judging. But we can't always make, statements, looking on the outside. But we can, from our own perspective, see how God continues to pour out his blessing on our lives as we continue to be faithful. And Ruth certainly... I think the reason the book is named Ruth and not Naomi,
right,
is because Ruth was that sterling character and that person who grasped, somehow that importance of following God with your whole heart, trusting him with everything, and he would reward that.
Yeah, what an incredible story. I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. So thanks for your time today, Pastor Arlie.
Thank you.
And thanks for connecting with us on CWC Dive Deep. We want to answer the questions that are on your mind. So I encourage you to submit a question by going to cwc.life/dive-deep. If you benefit from this podcast, then spread the word and tell others about it. Join us next week as we continue our discussion of price and providence. And in case you missed any past episodes, you can check those out at cwc.life. Have a great week.